Good morning, Year 7, and welcome to Lesson 4 of History. And today we're going to have a look at Edward VI. So we're going to look at Henry VIII's son. And we're going to be thinking about how did Edward VI change the church, focusing on who Edward was, what he was like, a little bit about his character. And then we're going to explain how and why he changed the church in England and have a look at what it looked like. So first of all, I want you to, in a second, pause the video here and have a go at this starter. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to name 5 of wives of Henry VIII, name 4 of the things that happened to Henry's wives, so 4 different things. Name 3 of Henry VIII's children, 2 of the houses who fought in the Wars of the Roses, and 1 problem that Henry VIII had. So pause the video now and have a go at answering those 5 different things. So let's see how you got on. So you could have had Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, or Catherine Parr, so 5 of those 6. 4 things that happened to his wives. Well, they got beheaded. 1, obviously Catherine Parr survived. Jane Seymour died in childbirth, or they got divorced. 3 of his children, so you should have Edward, Mary and Elizabeth. 2 of the houses that fought in the Wars of the Roses, it was York and Lancaster. And 1 problem that Henry VIII had, well, the biggest problem was he needed an heir, or you could talk about how he needed money because he spent quite a lot of it. So I wonder how you got on. Hopefully you got all of them right. Just want to remind you about last week's facts, just to go through them, because I remembered that in your fact book they are quite detailed, so I just want to check we're all okay. So the problems facing Henry, so failure to have a son, he was also fighting lots of wars, so he needed more money. The role of the monasteries, if you remember, I added a picture and I labelled them around last week. So they looked after travellers, they supported religious orders, they taught children, they copied books, they looked after the sick, they looked after travellers, anything like that. The dissolution of the monasteries, so the closing down of the monasteries is the true definition. But we also talked about how that saw finances and religious books being removed from the English monasteries, followed by the destruction of them. If you remember, he sold the land off, didn't he? The Reformation, so that was when Henry reformed the church from Catholic to Protestant, but also when he broke away from Rome and turned England into a Protestant country. And Henry's ministers, one of his ministers behind the dissolution of the monasteries was Thomas Cromwell. So just a recap, so just remember to keep going through. You will see that this, over the course of this week, you will get an email, and it will be a knowledge test, which is going through all of the things that we've looked at on these 4 YouTube lessons. It does not include the lesson from next week, so even if you complete it next week, I've done it so it's just the first 4 lessons. So make sure you keep going through your facts books, keep going through the memory, refreshing your memory of all these facts so that you can have a good go and see if you can get 100% on it. Okay, but any problems, just let me know. So Henry died, sadly, on the 28th of January in 1547. He ruled quite a while. He'd obviously made quite a lot of changes, and he changed the church from being, the Church of England from being Catholic to the Church of England and being Protestant. And we looked at the different reasons, sort of, was it because of money? Was it because he wanted to reform it? Was it because he just wanted a divorce? And when he died, he had 3 living children. He had 31-year-old Mary. As you can see, she is this one. We've got 14-year-old Elizabeth over here. Oh gosh, don't know what's going on there. Over here. And then we've also got 9-year-old Edward. Okay, so on his deathbed, who do you think he thought would be the best person? Would it be 31-year-old mature wise Mary? Would it be 14-year-old teenager Elizabeth, or 9-year-old Edward? And if you're 9, that's about year 5. So who do you think would be the best person to take over? Have a think. Well, obviously Henry chose Edward because yes, he was young. Yes, he was the same age as a Year 5 student, but he was a male. So it was obvious that Henry obviously believed that he was a much better choice than his older sisters because he was a male and therefore would be right for the throne. Now, Henry obviously made lots of changes to religion, closed the monasteries, he put the Bible into English so everyone could understand and read it, and he made himself the head of the church, and any future kings and queens of England would also be head of the church. But that was it. That was all Henry did. He made those changes, and actually a lot of people kind of say that he was still quite loyal to the Catholic faith and wanted sort of the Catholic rites on his deathbed. So he didn't make loads of changes, which kind of makes us think that he probably changed it really because he wanted a divorce. But what happened then when Edward became king? Because obviously Edward is going to become king at 9 years old, but that also means that he is going to be head of the Church of England. And so what could he possibly do? Well, who was this Edward? Who was this son? He was born on the 12th of October in 1537. And his father, Henry VIII, and his mother was Jane Seymour. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago now, I talked about Jane Seymour being the love of Henry's life. And a lot of people claim that she was probably the one that he really loved. They got on really well. Also, she gave him a son. So that's what he wanted. But obviously, unfortunately, she died shortly after Edward's birth. Jane was a Protestant herself, but obviously she didn't raise Edward because she wasn't around. But his next wife, Anne of Cleves, was Protestant. His next wife was Catholic, and then following that, Protestant. And he was raised as a Protestant, like his mother probably would have wanted, and obviously Henry was Protestant at this time, so he was raised as a Protestant. So when he was a small child, I suppose he was still a child and he became king, but when he was a child he was being raised as a Protestant and in the Protestant faith. He also became king at 9 years old, and he made radical changes to the church and religion in England. So just have a think. Edward's very young, not very much experience. What kind of problems do you think that he would face if you found out, unfortunately, the Queen died tomorrow and she was replaced by a 9-year-old child? How would you feel about them ruling us as a country? So maybe pause and write down a few of your ideas. But how do you think you'd feel? How do you think your character in your journal would feel? Remember all the journals that we've been doing this year? How do you think they would feel if they just found out that their new ruler was 9 years old? Unfortunately, he died at the age of 15 from tuberculosis, and actually Edward was quite a sickly child. He wasn't particularly well throughout the whole of his life, which kind of was a bit of a weakness for him as well. But when he was growing up, this is kind of like a big thing. They wanted to obviously showcase him as a strong king and a strong ruler, and this is a portrait of Edward that was taken. So this one's Edward, just in case you didn't know, and hopefully you remember that this is Henry, his father. And I just want you to have a look, maybe pause. What kind of similarities can you find between the two paintings? Obviously they've got the same weapon in the same position, they've got the same stance with their feet. The way that his elbow is and the dress and the clothing is all very similar. Got all the same jewellery on as well, the same hat. They're all very similar anyway. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of similarities. And why do you think this was done? It was to show that he was very strong. He could be as strong as his father. Obviously Henry would have wanted him to look strong and impress everyone around. And this kind of emphasises, again, how much Henry wanted his son to do well, how much he wanted his son to inspire others and to rule and carry on this Tudor name. But also, if you look at the picture, you can see that, especially compared to Henry, that Edward is very pale, very, very weak and very, sickly looking, because he was, unfortunately, he did have quite poor health. So Age was a problem. Because he was appointed at 9 years old, he was also appointed a protector, so an adult that would look after him. So obviously he wasn't old enough to look after the country fully by himself, so he had someone to help him, and this was taken on by the Duke of Somerset, Edward's uncle, called Edward Seymour. And he wasn't always particularly popular, and if you've got someone that's there to help you, you might find that a lot of their ideas are influencing yours, because he is now, and he's very much susceptible to all these ideas and changes, and he might go, oh yeah, that sounds good, yeah, let's do that, but he's not really speaking his own mind. And because he was raised as a Protestant, he made an awful lot of changes to the church. So he was influenced particularly by Thomas Cranmer, who was around during his father's reign, Henry VIII, and he was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and his kind of ideas, he influenced his protector, and then deepened these beliefs, and they kind of, what they wanted for the Protestant church, they kind of tried to encourage Edward to make those decisions. So we had the Act of Uniformity, which was an English prayer book. We had the Book of Common Prayer, and also one of the really big changes that they made was the fact that priests were now allowed to get married. So Catholic priests were not allowed to get married, and they still aren't in today's Catholic Church, but priests and the Protestants were allowed to get married. So imagine, you've been a priest, well, you at the time, you're now being told you can't be Catholic, but you can switch and become a Protestant priest, but now you can get married, which is brilliant, which is great. But because of him enforcing these prayer books, particularly up north and down south, some people didn't like that. They didn't want all this change. They were, they'd been Catholics, they'd always known the Catholic religion, and they didn't want to be told what they could and couldn't do. They didn't like the changes to the way that they worship, the changes to the church, the changes to the services. It was a bit too much for them. And there was even a group of rebels that uprose, rised against him, about 900. Down in Devon. So because he did this, a lot of people weren't particularly happy with it, because there was too much change. Okay, so let's have a look at changes. There's two pictures of a Catholic church. So this is what the inside of the Catholic church looked like at the time. So I've picked out a few things. Some of the things I couldn't put on the picture, so I'll just talk you through them. But we've got lots of statues, so you can see the statues here. Let me put my highlighter pen on, because actually it'll be a bit easier, won't it? So we've got statues here, we've got statues and crucifix here and here, lots of statues of Jesus, of the Virgin Mary. You can see here in particularly, I know it's black and white, apologies, you might be able to work out that there's some at the top here as well, but over here we've got stained glass windows, and the stained glass windows, as we know, because we've talked about this and we've looked at the medieval church, were really important because the Bible and the sermons and the services were all in Latin, and people obviously couldn't understand that. So the fact that they had all these paintings, they had pictures of what hell and purgatory and heaven looked like, and we've looked at those doom paintings this year already, they were all on there, and Bible stories were depicted on these stained glass windows. And if you go into Catholic churches today, you will still see that there are lots of churches with these pictures in the stained glass windows. There was lots of gold. The church was quite rich. It had lots of gold chalices and crosses and candlesticks. And obviously when Henry closed down the monasteries, he sold off all of these gold chalices and candlesticks and crosses and made lots of money from them. The priest, I know it's black and white, my apologies, but the priest would wear lots of expensive and colourful robes. There'd be a very expensive stone altar, maybe even marble altar in the centre. The Bible in a Catholic church would be in Latin. There'd be what's known as a rood screen, which was to separate the priest from the worshippers. So, as you can see here, well, it's kind of this really, but they're kind of blocked off away, so there's definitely, I'm the priest and I'm away from the public, and then it would be around here, so you can't really see it, but what's known as a sanctuary lamp, and this is to show the presence of God. So in a Catholic church, even today, you have communion at Mass at your service, and you're given the body and blood of Jesus, and if there usually is leftover body of Jesus, that would go into a special little container, which is on a special little like sort of I don't know, like, it's almost like a safe, but it's not a safe. I can't think how to describe it right now. But it would go in there, and you'd have your sanctuary lamp, which was lit as a candle that's constantly lit to show you that the presence of God is there. So if you see a candle lit, which is sort of behind on the altar, and you go in a Catholic church, that's what it's there for. That's what it's symbolising. So this is what the church was like, and through Henry VIII, the church continued to be like this, bar the Bible was in English. When Edward came along, he made all these changes. So we've got, priests now being able to marry, and we've got the Act of Uniformity. We've also got a very different church. Okay, so this is what the Protestant Church would look like. The prayer book is now in English, it's not in Latin. The rood screen is removed, so there's no sort of stance between the priest and everyone there at church. Instead of a big fancy altar, we've got a very simple wooden table. We've got a pulpit where the priest would preach the new English services to the public. On the walls, we've got wall plaques which have got the Lord's Prayer and parts of the Bible in English, so everyone can see it and understand and can say it along with the priest now. The priest is in very plain clothes, no fancy gold trim and colourful, bright colour clothing. And then we've got plain windows as well, so it's very, very different. So imagine if you were living at this time, it would be extremely different, okay? And it would be quite odd, I could imagine. So what I'd like to do is have a go at these 4 tasks. So pause the video and have a go at these 4 tasks. So write a brief summary of Edward's life, include some of his achievements, the key details, sort of his religious changes, his age. You could draw a little sketch of what he looked like. You can talk about the fact that he died very early on. He, was quite polite, but obviously he didn't really rule on his own. He had a protector, that kind of thing. You can even draw a little sketch of what he looked like. Then number 2, I want you to either draw, so you can draw it yourself, or you can print some pictures if you want and label them in your books, it's up to you, or you can just write them as a little table. But can you write down the key features of the Catholic Church, and can you write down the key features of the Protestant Church? Then explain how the 2 churches were different, okay? So explain what are the key differences between these 2 churches and how they would have looked, their appearance and what was there, okay? And really make it explicit. Think about why. Maybe explain why you think they were so different. Why do you think there was this difference? And Protestants kind of felt God was there, God was everywhere, and you can just speak to him. You didn't need fancy things to be able to communicate with him, okay? And then I want you to think about question 4. How would you feel if you were living at this time and you saw these changes? So maybe do it you could write this in the perspective of your journal character. So, like Lord Geoffrey or Lady Agnes or Peasant Man John or Mary. How do you think they would feel? They've been brought up Catholic. Would they be happy that they could now understand the church? Would they be sad because it's very different and they don't like the changes? What do you think? So have a go at answering those 4 questions as best you can. If you want to send them in to me, feel free, don't mind, I'd love to have a read of them, but see what you come up with. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at them. And when Edward died, at the age of 15 in 1553 from tuberculosis, the natural heir to the throne was meant to be his eldest sister Mary, who was a very fierce Catholic. She'd been raised as a Catholic. She was the first child. Edward wanted to leave his throne to his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, because she was a Protestant. He'd made all these changes and he didn't want them to relapse, because then his sister was going to take over and make everything Catholic again. So he tried to insist that Lady Jane Grey should become the next Protestant queen, but the people of England refused to have Jane, and she therefore only ruled for 9 days. And there's a great funny horrible histories clip which I'll put in the comments section of this video, so please check it out and have a look. And why do you think Edward tried to disinherit his sister Mary? And why do you think people supported Mary instead of Jane? So I want you to have a go and think about them and answer those questions, ready for next week's lesson on Mary. And then finally, just as we're ending, can you have a go at answering these 5 questions. So these are your fact book questions. Can you have a go at them without looking in your fact books? So what age did Edward become king, and how old was he when he died? What religion was Edward raised? What were some of the traditional features of the Catholic Church? What were some of the traditional features of the Protestant Church? And who did Edward say should be the new queen instead of Mary? So have a go answering those, and then check your answers and see what you got right. Next week, our last lesson, is going to be on Mary. So we're going to have a look at what happened with Mary. In the comments, there's a couple of clips that I'll put in just to give you some videos on the Reformation and on Edward and on Lady Doing Grace. So check them out if you've got time, and keep revising your fact books questions ready for your little test that you've got as well. Any questions, drop me an email, guys. Hope you're okay. See you later. Bye.